Hello everyone, you're watching Vertibox Game Review. On this episode, we're looking at Marvel Heroes, a new free-to-play action RPG MMO made by Gazillion Entertainment and David Brevik, the creator of Diablo. I'm a big fan of Diablo 2, so the thought of playing the spiritual successor with iconic Marvel characters like Wolverine, Emma Frost, and Iron Man had me really excited. I've been participating in the closed beta for a while now, and I recently posted my impressions and feedback on the official forums. I was surprised to see the post really resonated with the player base. Now that the NDA has been lifted, I can finally share my impressions about the game and give you a review. I would like to put out a disclaimer that the game is technically in closed beta, so this isn't an official review. But with the game's launch coming in just a short few weeks, and with the open beta this weekend, what you see here is likely going to be in the final product. As a concept for a game, I think Marvel Heroes has a lot of potential. Even though it's free to play, it's been hyped up as a AAA experience. And it's supposed to be the game that David Brevik and his team would have made if they were in charge of Diablo 3. So, Marvel Heroes has a lot to live up to. In Marvel Heroes, players can play any of 26 available characters to put an end to Dr. Doom's plan. Each character has their own specialized equipment, which should hopefully give us a lot of loot to find, and 3 separate customizable skill trees. The game's also part MMO, which means there are open zones where you can cooperate with other players as you quest through the game. It's clear that Gazillion has undertaken an extremely ambitious project. If they executed all of their design goals and delivered all of their promises, Marvel Heroes would have been one of the best games of 2013. However, the reality is that the ambition came at a huge cost. After playing for just an hour, it was obvious to me that the game lacks polish and largely remains unfinished. First off, the combat, to me, feels fairly clunky and unexciting. Attacks often don't flow from one attack to the next and become unresponsive at times. A lot of the attacks felt rather stale and mechanical, like Captain America's punches and shield tosses. Enemies simply don't seem to react to the specific nature and the impact of your attacks, and sometimes they don't react at all. Enemy death animations also don't take into account physics. Regardless of the attacks used, they often keel over in a very floaty fashion. Sometimes, enemies just stand there, waiting for you to attack them, or they watch their buddies die before they decide to take part in the battle. Maybe they just don't like each other very much. The balance of the game seems incredibly off at times too. Sometimes it takes dozens of shots from your basic attack to kill a common mugger. Aren't we supposed to be seasoned superheroes using state-of-the-art weapons? This kind of game needs to start your character in a significant confrontation that is befitting of a hero, and then progress those challenges to epic and galactic proportions. And despite the large amount of life some enemies have, the game is far from challenging most of the time. For example, multiple enemies will line up simultaneously, fire their weapons at you at close range, and you won't have any risk of dying. I'm not talking about characters like Luke Cage, who have unbreakable skin. I'm talking about characters like Cyclops, who have no special physical defense of any kind. Movement and flying are also kind of clunky. The developer made sure that the controls work differently than other action RPGs. One bit of frustration for me was when I held the mouse button to move my character, it would stop as soon as I released the mouse button rather than continue to walk to my cursor. Why Gazillion had to change the control scheme that's been well ingrained into the minds of gamers everywhere, I'll never know. There's also a lot of problems with the collision detection of the game. Enemies seem to have this large invisible bubble around them that prevents you from getting too close, which creates all sorts of problems, where it appears like your character ought to be able to squeeze in between 2 enemies, but you can't. Fighting waves of enemies that feature the same attack patterns and AI quickly becomes a chore. The environments and zones stretch on for what seems like forever, which makes the gameplay feel overly repetitive. I would have liked to have experienced some environmental set pieces and random events along the way to add variety and break up the action. Most enemies you face aren't interesting in the slightest. Melee enemies like thugs, muggers, aim scientists, dockyard cutthroats, Hydra radars, and Cliffwalker tribe warriors all behave the same way, as they just run up to you in a suicidal fashion. At least the hand ninjas blinked away randomly at times, I guess, but there's very little to distinguish them from the other enemies. And then there's ranged enemies like punks and mercenary marksmen that simply shoot at you from a distance and often run like idiots in between their attacks. Most of the enemies in the game appear to be human, with some larger mech enemies thrown in at times during the later stages of the game. Beyond the cosmetic differences, the encounters you'll face will mostly play out the same way. Since the combat pretty much degenerates into spamming your character's best attacks all the time, the game becomes shallow and feels like a chore. The game would have really benefited from having dozens of monster types that have drastically different AI, and required the players to use different tactics and strategies. Blizzard's Diablo 3 had a metric ton of enemy variety like this, and those crazy elite champion packs turned the gameplay on its head at times, always offering something interesting to the players. A unique feature in Marvel Heroes is the concept of event bosses, which are superpower versions of iconic Marvel villains like Venom and Electro. These bosses have an insane amount of health and take several minutes for a group of players to take down. What would have been a deep, engaging battle often turns into a shallow spam fest where every character just stands in the same location, holding their main attack button down for 5 minutes until the boss is dead, occasionally dodging the odd projectile. There's very little variation in the strategy required to defeat most of them. During these battles, there's usually so many effects going off from all these special abilities that it's impossible to see what's going on. And for all your efforts, you will get a unique medal, but the reward hardly feels worth it. I found myself simply ignoring them later on in the game. That's not to say there aren't any challenges in the game. Some of the boss battles can be quite challenging, and if you're not prepared, the Kingpin fight will definitely test your skills. I only wish moments like this weren't so rare, because moments like this would have brought a lot more relevance to the itemization, crafting systems, and proper optimization of your character's stats and skills. As for the presentation of Marvel Heroes, it's a good looking game as far as action RPGs go. Characters look quite good, and there's certainly plenty of costumes to choose from to give your characters a unique look you're looking for. The characters' personalities are well represented by the voice actors, and I think the fans will be pleased with how the developers portrayed them within the game. Although I suspect the Jean Grey fans will likely be upset that they cannot move objects telekinetically. Like Diablo 2, each character has 3 skill trees for you to customize. Out of all the heroes, I have to say Scarlet Witch or Thor were my favorite. Mostly because they were extremely overpowered and will let you bypass the problems with the game, which oddly enough made the game more enjoyable. Some of the abilities have cool effects and are satisfying to use, but I found most of them to be redundant or not very useful. For example, all of Storm's basic attacks seems to stun the enemy. With games like Diablo 3 offering 4 basic attacks with 5 ways to ruin each one, it's undeniable that Marvel Heroes is lacking here. Sometimes higher level abilities that your character receives at level 18 are a lot worse than your basic attacks. Sometimes these higher level skills don't do any damages at all. How does a massive lightning storm miss an enemy of that size? Variety is a concern as well. There doesn't seem to be many viable ways to build your character. For instance, there's one attack skill that is always better than the others, which forces you to play your hero a specific way, rather than develop your own playstyle. Remember how cool it was to be a necromancer in Diablo 2, raising massive army of skeletons, making corpses explode, or casting poison novas? While that kind of build variety was promised in Marvel Heroes, I really don't see it here. Sometimes your character's best skill is actually your basic attack, and when it's not, you'll wish you hadn't invested 10 skill points when you unlock better skills at higher levels. I'm not a fan of this type of skill progression system because it forces the player to aggressively plan out their character build, or simply copy a build online. Before they start playing and discovering things within the game for themselves, it also forces players to become too reliant on respecs to feel optimal. Most characters end up sharing the same attacks and playstyles too. They just go by different names featuring different animations, like Rocket Raccoon's Energy Barrage. Cyclops' optic barrage, or Iron Man's repulsor barrage. This seems to be the case with all sorts of skills in the game. From my understanding, one of the major selling points with Marvel Heroes is to develop 26 completely different characters. But without different playstyles to explore, collecting and leveling them all up doesn't seem all that compelling. On that note, because Marvel Heroes is a free-to-play game, Gazillion makes money by selling characters and costumes. Well, I'm happy to report that in-game store works perfectly. In fact, it's the most polished feature in the entire game. I'm glad to see they got their priorities straight. Itemization within the game fares a bit better. In addition to traditional modifiers like health, magic find, and critical hit chance, you can find items that grant bonus skill points and even grant access to skills far deeper in the skill tree than your current level. However, because Marvel Heroes calculates damage based almost entirely off your skill points, and because it encourages you to spam the same attack over and over again, the best items are those that grant points to a single attack skill. This essentially makes the rest of the items in the game totally useless. These modifiers can be found on low-quality magical items, which can make them vastly superior to most of the rare and epic items you'll find. I found that this design really took away from the joy in discovering loot, as these items can simply be purchased from item vendors in your home base. If Gazillion would have made enemies more challenging, then there might have been a need for players to think about itemization. There's also unique items called artifacts. Each character can equip 2 at the same time, and they add a huge variety of powerful abilities to your character. For example, one artifact gives you a massive amount of spirit regeneration, while another lets you summon a raptor to fight for you. These types of effects can change how you play the game, which gets 2 thumbs up from me. In addition to artifacts though, I would like to see legendary and set items for every item slot or every character in the game, but they are nowhere to be found. Inventory management is a lot better than it was in Diablo 2. They thankfully did away with item Tetris. Still, I found the icons to be rather small at higher resolutions. The game offers a shared stash where you can access all your items from any character. There's a lot of loot to keep though, so without the ability to automatically sort your items, I found it to be pretty inadequate. I really think the game would have benefited from having multiple stash tabs. There's also crafting items in Marvel Heroes, which are similar to gems in Diablo. The huge problem though is that they don't stack. You'll find dozens of crafting elements within just a few hours and won't have any place to put them. The developers actually admitted that the code wasn't designed to allow item stacking. But why didn't anyone think of this? I have to wonder why such a common feature wasn't designed into the game from the start. In addition to these problems, I also encountered some weird glitches that prevented items from being moved if they were placed in the lower item slots. There's also crafting systems in the game where you can create your own items, upgrade your gear, and add offensive and defensive modifiers to your costumes. I think crafting is pretty cool, but the UI is just a chore to use in the game. I just feel like it's busy work. I really don't understand why the developers just didn't copy a crafting UI from another game, like the one from Diablo 3. That UI would have been perfect in Marvel Heroes. Lastly, I can't comment on the endgame because it's still not available. Given the lack of polish in other areas, I'm a bit skeptical as to how engaging and enjoyable the endgame will be. It's going to receive the least amount of testing before the game's officially launched. However, while the endgame is incredibly important to the game's success, and it's definitely a concern of mine, it's honestly the least of the game's problems. The frustrating UI, bland gameplay, unfulfilled promises, and the overall lack of polish will likely be this game's undoing. While Marvel Heroes is a free-to-play game, people like myself will judge this game by the standards set by David Brevik himself, and not by the standards of other free-to-play games on the market. I'm really struggling to find a specific reason to recommend Marvel Heroes over other action RPGs. If you're looking for an insane amount of depth, character customization, and complexity, then Path of Exile already offers that in spades. And if you just want to smash through hordes of monsters in the most visceral and satisfying way imaginable, then nothing will hold a candle to Diablo 3. And if you want to play an engaging endgame with a glorious item hunt, well, things are looking pretty grim at the moment. Now, there's a chance that all of these issues I pointed out in the video will be corrected. But with so many of these free-to-play games that are unfinished when the game launches, budgets are eventually slashed, companies scramble to survive, and the game development basically stops. If Gazillion can fix these problems, we'll have a really addicting action RPG to play. But I'm afraid to say that it might be a really long wait. So there you have it. Those are my thoughts and impressions of the closed beta of Marvel Heroes. I hope you enjoyed watching this video. And if you played Marvel Heroes, what'd you think of it? Will you be playing it? Be sure to leave your comments below. And if you enjoyed this video, please give it a like and subscribe. Thanks for watching.